Black woman ordered out of VIP bank lounge. Moments later, they learn she's the new chairwoman. The security guard's voice cut through the marble-tiled silence of the Sterling Trust Bank's VIP wealth lounge like a blade. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of this area. This lounge is reserved for high-net-worth clients only." Heads turned. Conversations halted. A hush settled over the room like fog rolling in. Denise Walker didn't flinch. She stood tall in her muted gray blazer and low heels, holding a worn leather portfolio in one hand, her other hand wrapped calmly around the strap of a scuffed tote. Her eyes moved from the guard to the young blonde woman in a navy pantsuit approaching from behind him. Chloe Sanders, assistant branch manager, badge gleaming. Chloe's heels clicked against the polished floor like punctuation marks. She looked Denise up and down, pressing lips, raising brows. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, voice sharp with that forced courtesy people use when they've already made up their minds. "This section is not open to the general public. Do you have an appointment?" Denise offered a soft, measured response. "I do. 10 o'clock. Meeting with Director Jameson." Chloe gave a patronizing smile. "I think you must be mistaken. Director Jameson doesn't meet with walk-ins." A man in a tailored suit nearby chuckled under his breath. "Probably looking for the janitor's office," he muttered, just loud enough. Another woman whispered, "She must have wandered in off the street." Phones were already out, some discreetly recording, others pretending to scroll. A TikTok caption was forming before anyone knew who she really was. But Denise didn't argue. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a document. Chloe didn't even glance at it. Instead, she turned to the guard and said, "Please escort her to the front, now." That was the moment the bank made a mistake that would cost them millions and spark a national reckoning they never saw coming. Denise didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice, didn't protest, didn't even sigh. She simply nodded once, calm, almost serene, and tucked the document back into her portfolio. The security guard, a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and a clearly uncomfortable expression, stepped closer. "Ma'am, if you'll just come with me," he said quietly, almost apologetically. She met his eyes for a brief moment and gave a small, dignified smile. "Of course," she replied, her tone even and unshaken. As she turned to walk with him, a hush followed her exit like a shadow, yet the air buzzed with unspoken assumptions. Chloe stood with arms folded, scanning the room with a smug sense of authority. To her, the situation was handled. Another awkward misunderstanding neatly removed before it could taint the sterile perfection of the bank's most exclusive space. No harm done, or so she thought. What no one in that lounge realized was that the very woman they had dismissed and escorted out was scheduled to sign final acquisition documents later that morning, documents that would officially make her chairwoman of the Sterling Trust Board of Directors, following a months-long merger with one of the nation's most powerful investment consortiums. A decision that would shift not only leadership, but culture, policy, and internal accountability throughout the entire company. Denise had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this. She had grown used to the assumptions, the quick glances that dismissed her, the comments laced with polite racism, the disbelieving eyes when she introduced herself in boardrooms full of gray suits and inherited wealth. But this one hit differently. Not because it was new, but because it happened at her bank, on her day. She wasn't hurt. She was focused. She walked with the guard through the lobby, passing a massive wall mural celebrating the bank's legacy of integrity. A young teller behind the front desk looked up and did a double take, recognizing her from an internal announcement email sent just days ago. Denise nodded gently in return. She didn't need to say a word. Within 30 minutes, every person in that building would know who she was, and none of them would forget what they had done. The front desk receptionist, Janelle, barely out of college, smart, observant, and quick with details, froze mid-keystroke when she saw Denise standing quietly beside Officer Hal, the security guard. There was something about Denise's presence that demanded attention without asking for it. Calm, controlled, like someone used to making decisions that echoed far beyond the room. Janelle's eyes flicked to the badge clipped to Denise's blazer. Her breath caught, and she stood from her chair a little too quickly. "Ms. Walker, ma'am, should I notify Director Jameson that you've arrived?" Chloe, who had followed just a few paces behind, stopped in her tracks. "Excuse me," she said, voice slightly raised, sharp with disbelief. "You know her?" Janelle hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but Denise spared the young woman the discomfort. "Yes, she does. I'm Denise Walker," she said, calmly but firmly, "and I have a 10 o'clock meeting upstairs. I believe I'm on the schedule. You can confirm it under executive access." Chloe blinked hard, as if trying to clear fog from her brain. Then she laughed, a short, forced burst. "This has to be a misunderstanding. You're that Denise Walker?" She said it like the name didn't belong to the woman standing in front of her. "As in, the board chair?" Denise tilted her head slightly. "That's correct." Her voice held no arrogance, just the weight of fact. Chloe's cheeks turned the color of spoiled milk. Around them, customers and tellers were watching. The air had shifted. Conversations had stilled. Phones were out again, but now they were recording for a very different reason. The energy in the room flipped like a switch. Suddenly, everyone was aware that something monumental was unfolding. Officer Hal took a half-step back, realizing he'd just tried to escort out the most powerful person in the entire building. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Denise nodded. "I understand. You were doing your job." She turned to Chloe, who looked like she might vanish into the floor. "But you," Denise said softly, "you weren't." Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Denise didn't wait. She turned to Janelle. "Please inform Director Jameson I'm here. I'll wait in conference room A." Janelle nodded, already reaching for the phone. As Denise walked away, she passed the mural again. This time the gold-lettered words, "Integrity, Trust, Excellence," seemed to shimmer with irony. What Chloe and the others hadn't yet realized was that the real meeting was no longer upstairs. It was already happening, right here, in plain sight. And every step Denise took now wasn't just a walk to a boardroom. It was the beginning of a reckoning. By the time Denise stepped into conference room A, the tension in the building had shifted from quiet judgment to silent panic. Behind the smoked glass walls, the room was empty except for a sleek black table, a pitcher of water, and 10 leather chairs that still held the impression of the powerful men who usually filled them. Denise didn't sit. Instead, she placed her portfolio at the head of the table and stood with her back to the wall of windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. From this vantage point, she could see the heart of the city pulsing below, its movement constant, chaotic, and unapologetically ambitious. It reminded her of who she was. It reminded her of why she was here. Less than 5 minutes passed before Director Jameson rushed in, suit jacket askew, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Ms. Walker," he began, voice breathless and stiff. I had no idea you were already in the building. I was told you were arriving closer to 10. Denise turned, her expression neutral but unreadable. "I was," she said simply, "but I arrived early. I wanted to see how your staff handled unannounced high-profile guests." Jameson paled. "I see," he said, swallowing hard. "And did they?" Denise raised an eyebrow but didn't answer right away. She allowed the silence to linger, just long enough to let the gravity of the moment settle. Then, with perfect composure, she opened her portfolio and removed a copy of the final merger agreement, sliding it across the table. "Before I sign this," she said, "we're going to have a different kind of meeting. I want every senior manager in this branch present, in this room, today, not tomorrow, not next week, now." Jameson blinked, uncertain whether he should object, but something in Denise's voice told him not to. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, right away." As he scrambled to follow her order, Denise turned back toward the window. She didn't need to look powerful. She was powerful. And before the hour was over, everyone in that building would be forced to see her as more than just a woman in gray. Within 15 minutes, the room filled with tension and tailored suits. Department heads, regional managers, and executive assistants filed into Conference Room A with stiff smiles and darting eyes, clearly unsure why they were summoned so abruptly. Chloe entered last, her face pale, posture rigid, eyes locked downward. No one dared to speak above a whisper. Director Jameson cleared his throat, attempting to take control. "Everyone, thank you for gathering on short notice. As you may have heard, we're joined this morning by Ms. Denise Walker, our new chairwoman of the board." Murmurs swept through the room like a breeze through dry leaves. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others finally realized the gravity of what had occurred downstairs. Denise didn't wait for further introductions. She stepped forward and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had waited her entire career for this moment. "Let's be clear. I didn't call this meeting to talk about performance metrics or quarterly projections. I called this meeting because earlier today, in this very building, I was profiled, dismissed, and publicly humiliated by staff who judged me based solely on my appearance. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a culture you've all allowed to fester, one that prioritizes assumptions over accountability, appearances over truth, and familiarity over fairness." Her voice never rose, yet it cut through the air with surgical precision. "Now, I want each of you to look around this room and ask yourselves, who's missing? Who gets overlooked? Who's not welcome unless they look a certain way, dress a certain way, or speak with a certain tone?" No one answered. A few shifted in their seats. Chloe sat completely still, her knuckles white against the edge of the table. Denise continued, "Starting today, that culture ends. Not with a press release, not with a workshop, but with action." She placed a document on the table, a printed policy titled Equal Access Protocol, Immediate Implementation Plan. You'll each receive a copy. You'll each be accountable for every step. And in case it's not clear, this isn't a suggestion. It's a condition of your continued employment under the new leadership of this institution. Silence hung thick in the room. Denise let it sit. She had their full attention now. A heavy silence lingered as Denise stepped back from the table, allowing her words to settle like ash after a fire. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Director Jameson cleared his throat again, his earlier bravado fully replaced by something more cautious, respectful even. "Ms. Walker," he said, trying to recover, "I assure you, we take these concerns seriously, and will—" Denise cut him off with a raised hand, not rudely, but with finality. "With all due respect, Director, this is not about assurances. This is about structure. You don't change behavior by reminding people to be nice. You change systems. So let me be clear about what happens next." She tapped the protocol document lightly. "Effective immediately, every customer-facing employee in this institution, from tellers to wealth advisors, will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. Not a 30-minute slideshow. Real training, with consequences for those who fail to complete or comply. We will establish an anonymous reporting system for bias-related incidents, managed by an independent third party. Incidents will no longer disappear into the ether of internal HR. They will be tracked, audited, and addressed. Not quietly, transparently." She scanned the room, making deliberate eye contact. "And there will be real consequences for repeat offenders, regardless of tenure, title, or performance history." Several managers looked down at their notepads. Others glanced at Chloe, whose face was still frozen in a kind of polite horror. But Denise wasn't finished. I also expect every executive in this room to submit a department-specific action plan within the next 10 business days, outlining how you intend to implement inclusive practices in your teams. Not just for customers, internally as well. That means recruitment, promotion, voice. I want to know who's being heard in your meetings. I want to know who's being passed over. A younger woman at the far end of the table, a junior compliance officer who rarely spoke, lifted her eyes for the first time and stared at Denise with quiet awe. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, relief, a shift. Denise held that gaze a moment longer before concluding. Leadership isn't about position. It's about impact. And after today, every person in this building will understand the difference. She paused, then added, "Now, are there any questions?" The room remained silent, not out of fear, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had said exactly what needed to be said. As the meeting adjourned, the executives filed out quietly, most of them deep in thought, their usual clipped steps now more measured. Denise remained behind, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the conference table. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. The work had only just begun, but the message had been delivered. Chloe lingered near the door, clearly unsure whether to leave or stay, her posture betraying a cocktail of embarrassment and defensiveness. Denise noticed, of course. She always noticed. With a slight nod, she invited Chloe back in. Chloe walked slowly to the table, her expression tight, voice soft. "Ms. Walker, I want to apologize again. Denise raised a hand gently. "This isn't about an apology, Ms. Sanders. Apologies are easy. Change is harder. And it's not just about what happened today." Chloe looked down. "I didn't think I was that kind of person," she admitted. "I didn't mean to come off the way I did. I was just trying to do my job." Denise studied her for a long moment, then said, "That's the most dangerous kind of discrimination. The kind that hides behind procedures, behind instinct, behind the comfort of assuming you're doing the right thing. You weren't trying to cause harm, but you did. That's why systems have to be smarter than assumptions." Chloe nodded slowly, her eyes misting. "What happens now?" Denise answered evenly. "Now you have a choice. You can walk away from this place with a bruised ego and defensiveness, or you can stay, do the work, and help make sure no one else ever feels like I did when I walked into that lounge." Chloe swallowed hard and nodded. "I want to stay." "Then stay. But understand, accountability is part of the deal. We're not fixing reputations here. We're fixing a culture." As Chloe turned to leave, a weight visibly lifted from her shoulders, not the relief of escape, but the clarity of direction. Denise exhaled slowly. Outside the glass walls, the city kept moving, but inside, something had shifted. For Chloe, for the bank, and maybe, in time, for everyone who walked through those doors. Later that afternoon, long after the tension of the morning had passed and the boardroom had emptied, Denise sat alone in her temporary office, overlooking Park Avenue. The city was a blur of yellow taxis, hurried footsteps, and window reflections, but inside, the quiet was purposeful. Her phone buzzed with a steady stream of notifications, emails from department heads confirming training schedules, a message from legal confirming the compliance structure for the anonymous reporting system, and a short but sincere note from the bank's CEO expressing his full support and requesting a personal meeting the following day. Progress, she thought. Measurable, visible progress. Still, she knew the real work wasn't about documents or deadlines. It was about hearts and minds, about reconditioning a company culture so steeped in subtle exclusion that even good people didn't realize they were perpetuating it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter she'd kept tucked inside her portfolio. It was handwritten, creased at the edges, dated 3 years earlier. It was from a young woman named Monique, a former intern, who had been assigned to the same branch where Chloe worked. Monique had written about how she'd been mistaken for the cleaning staff more than once, how a male executive once asked if she was here with the caterers, and how no one had taken her seriously when she spoke in meetings. "I never said anything," the letter read, "because I didn't want to be labeled difficult. I just smiled, did the work, and told myself to get through it. But it chipped away at me. I left the industry 6 months later." Denise folded the letter and placed it beside her laptop. Monique's story wasn't rare. It was just rarely heard. That's what this was about. Not one moment in a lounge, not a viral clip on someone's phone, but a system that slowly pushed people out while pretending to invite them in. Across the room, her assistant knocked gently and entered, carrying a folder of press inquiries and a printout of social media mentions. One headline stood out in bold: "Bank Chairwoman turned away from VIP lounge, launches historic inclusion reforms." Denise glanced at it, but didn't linger. Headlines would fade. Hashtags would quiet. What mattered was that the next time someone like Monique walked into this bank, or any bank, she wouldn't have to brace herself. She'd be seen, she'd be heard, and she'd stay. That, Denise thought, would be the real victory. 2 weeks later, the transformation was already visible, not in grand press releases or flashy marketing campaigns, but in the quiet details that only those paying close attention would notice. The receptionist's desk now displayed a discreet plaque that read, "All clients welcome, all voices respected." Employees wore new name badges that included pronouns by choice. Every meeting room had a printed card with an inclusion reminder. Diversity is not a checkbox, it's a strength. More importantly, the atmosphere had changed. Tellers greeted clients with intention, not assumption. Managers listened more and spoke less. Chloe, still present and noticeably more introspective, had volunteered to lead the first internal workshop on recognizing implicit bias, using her own story as a cautionary lesson. Denise hadn't asked her to. She simply stepped into the role because she understood the value of doing so. During one of those early trainings, a young black financial analyst named Jada stood up and shared that, for the first time since joining the company, she felt like she could be herself without apology. "I used to speak differently in meetings," she admitted, "like I had to perform a version of myself just to belong. Now I speak like me, and people still listen." Her voice cracked slightly as she said it, and in that room full of polished professionals, several others nodded with silent understanding. That was the moment Denise knew the change was taking root, not just in policy, but in people. The numbers would follow, the metrics and charts and upward arrows that boardrooms loved so much. But this shift in humanity, in belonging, was the real ROI. Denise didn't need anyone to thank her. She hadn't done it for applause. She had done it because she remembered all the times someone like her was told, quietly and politely, that they didn't belong. And she had vowed to make sure the next time that happened, there would be systems, place to push back. Not just one voice, many, together. A month after that unforgettable morning, Denise was invited to deliver a keynote at the National Financial Equity Summit in Washington, D.C. The conference hall was filled with decision-makers from the largest banks in the country, CEOs, compliance officers, regulators, and advocates. The spotlight was sharp, the stage polished, but Denise stood at the podium with the same calm command she carried in the Sterling Trust boardroom. She didn't use slides, no buzzwords, no slogans, just her voice, measured, unwavering, and deeply human. She spoke of systems, not scandals. She described how institutions, when left unchecked, begin to reward comfort over fairness, familiarity over innovation. The issue isn't always intentional exclusion, she said. It's who we picture in power, who we trust with decisions, who we think belongs, and who we don't even realize we've filtered out. She shared a brief version of what happened in the VIP lounge, just enough to make the point, not enough to center herself. Then she shared what came next: the reporting system, the department plans, the cultural shift. She ended with a challenge that left the room silent. If your institution only works for the people who look like you, sound like you, and walk through the world like you, then it's broken, and it's your job to fix it. Not later. Now. The applause began slowly, but grew until the room stood. It wasn't performative. It was earned. Afterward, 3 different firms approached her to consult on internal reform. A senator's aide asked if she'd be willing to testify at a future congressional hearing on financial bias. But the moment that stayed with her came when a young Latina intern from a regional credit union approached with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you. I didn't think someone like me could ever be at the front of the room." Denise smiled and handed her a small card with a quote printed on it. "You belong. You always did, Demet. Now go build the system that sees you." Months passed, and the ripple effects of Denise's leadership continued to grow, far beyond the walls of Sterling Trust. The equal access protocol she had introduced was quietly adopted by 3 other major financial institutions, each adjusting the framework to their own operations, but keeping its core intact: transparency, accountability, and action. It wasn't just corporate policy anymore. It was becoming industry precedent. Business schools began studying the case, not just for its outcome, but for how Denise had navigated it. She hadn't sued. She hadn't shouted. She'd documented. She'd confronted. And she'd rebuilt, publicly, with strategy, and without ever raising her voice. Harvard included her in a case study titled Quiet Authority: Redesigning Power from the Inside Out. One professor described her as a systems thinker with a social spine, and the phrase stuck. But while the media was still catching up, Denise had already moved forward. She launched the Clarity Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to training young professionals of color in navigating corporate systems, understanding institutional power, and rewriting it from within. Her foundation partnered with law firms, tech companies, and banks to fund scholarships, mentorships, and training in ethical leadership. One of the first fellows was Monique, the young woman who had written Denise that letter years ago. After completing a master's in organizational leadership, she returned to the finance sector, this time as a senior culture strategist. When asked during a panel why she came back after leaving in frustration, Monique simply said, "Because someone made room, not by stepping aside, but by standing firm." Denise sat quietly in the audience during that panel, proud but unseen. That was how she preferred it. The work wasn't about being recognized. It was about making sure no one had to carry what she carried alone. Back at Sterling Trust, the numbers told their own story. Internal promotions among employees of color were up 38%. Retention among entry-level hires was the highest in a decade. And customer satisfaction had climbed, especially among first-time clients who reported feeling respected regardless of appearance or account size. But the moment Denise considered her greatest success came one rainy afternoon when she entered the very same VIP lounge where it had all started. The staff greeted her with warmth, not because they knew her title, but because they had been trained to greet everyone that way. No hesitation, no second guessing, just welcome. And for once, it wasn't extraordinary. It was normal, exactly how it should be. On a quiet Saturday morning, nearly a year to the day since that unforgettable incident, Denise found herself seated in a sunlit room at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. She had been invited to speak at a roundtable titled Modern Power and Invisible Barriers, surrounded by historians, activists, and corporate leaders from across the country. As the discussion unfolded, someone asked her what moment changed everything, not just for the bank, but for her personally. She paused for a moment, her gaze steady yet reflective. "It wasn't when they realized who I was," she said. "It was when I realized they didn't even think someone like me could be who I was. That's what stayed with me. Not the insult, but the expectation." The room was still. Denise continued, her voice soft but firm. "We live in a world that teaches people to scan and sort. Who's worth listening to? Who's worth serving? Who belongs where? And when you don't fit their image of power, they shrink you in their minds. I didn't change the system by yelling at it. I changed it by making sure it had to see me. All of me. Fully. Undeniably." After the panel, a young man approached her, early 20s, soft-spoken, wearing a badge from a small credit union in Detroit. He told her that his team had recently implemented the Equal Access Protocol after watching a viral clip of her keynote speech. "Our branch manager said, 'If someone like her could be ignored, what chance do our clients have?' he said. 'Now we don't start our meetings with numbers. We start with stories, because stories show us who we're missing.'" Denise smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's how change spreads," she told him. "Not through noise, but through people brave enough to see and say, 'This isn't right,' and then do something about it." As she stepped outside into the morning light, she didn't feel like a symbol or a headline. She felt like what she had always been, a woman who refused to be unseen, and in doing so, helped others be seen too.